Richard Pena was director of the New York Film Festival for Lincoln Center from 1988 through 2012. Richard organized major film series devoted to international cinema. He organized retrospectives of numerous directors, including Italy's Michelangelo Antonioni. He is a professor of film studies at Columbia University, where he specializes in film theory and international cinema. And this year, he's a visiting professor in Latin American studies at Princeton University. He is the co-host of Channel 13's popular weekly movie program, Reel 13. I'm looking forward to chatting with Richard about his love of Italy and Italian cinema. I'm so excited to chat with you, Richard, about so many things Italian film.
Good to be here.
So you traveled through Italy for studying film?
Well, when I was working for the New York Film Festival, I would go to Italy every year to see the new crop of Italian films for the various programs that we were doing. And then in the year 2000, we began a series at Lincoln Center called Open Roads, New Italian Cinema, which I'm happy to say has become really the leading U.S. showcase for new Italian films. So I had very, very close relations with people at Cinecittà and the various government agencies because we did so much Italian film at Lincoln Center.
Where are some centers in Italy where you visited?
Well, I think if you really want to kind of do almost anything in film, you have to go to Rome because that's where most of the producers and whatever are. But Bologna, for example, has the best film archive in Italy. They do wonderful restorations, especially very early Italian silent films. And we once did a big program with them on that and continue to have worked with them over the years. But actually, one of the things in recent Italian films is it's become quite regional. You now have filmmakers who live and work in, in Milan, in Sicily, but in Puglia, in Bari, in places where you never really thought of as filmmaking centers or areas. But now, of course, with the new equipment, people can make films anywhere.
True. At Lincoln Center, what were some of the successful film series, the Italian favorites?
Well, I guess of all the Italian shows that I did, the one that I was most proud of was a very big show that we did on neorealism. Because, neorealism, Italian neorealism is really, for me, one of the watershed moments in film history. It's really a kind of a game changer, not only for Italy, but for all of world cinema. But unfortunately, as happens over time, when people, say, in the U.S. would talk about it, they were only talking about 3 or 4 films, 5 at most. Films that were always the ones that were shown.
For those of us who don't know,
okay,
give us a little 101 of what time period,
we're talking right after the war, when Italian film studios were largely destroyed or very seriously damaged during the war. So Italian filmmakers began taking their cameras out into the streets, shooting with natural light on real locations, very often stories about common people, in a way really kind of offering a very different kind of cinema that anyone had been used to. And it had a huge effect all over the world, really, of a different way that you could make films.
What would be a few films that we might know?
Well, probably Rome Open City, The Bicycle Thief, Paisa, La Terra Trema. These are kind of the classics that one thinks of when you think of Italian neorealism. As I said, the 4 or 5 that get shown repeatedly, and they should. They're great films, so you should show them again. But it always sort of bothered me a bit that the movement was actually much broader and I think even more interesting than people knew about. So I decided I wanted to do a very large series on neorealism. So after a few years, I was able to put together about 40 films from the period 1945 to 1954 with the help, of course, of friends in Italy. And we did a major retrospective on that theme at Lincoln Center in 2009. And I was very, very proud of that series because it really, I think, helped shift the discussion and open people up to a whole other group of other directors such as Latuada and De Santis and Germi and people who were really quite great, but in a certain way had been forgotten a bit in this country.
What would be a few films that are lesser known but still worthy?
Oh gosh, there are so many. Well, I mean, if you think of just something like The Railroad Man by Pietro Germi or Latuada's film The Thief or Senza Pietà. I mean, these are really films that all came out at that time, which give us different shapes and flavors of neorealism, that it wasn't just one thing and whatever. So in a way, I wanted to round out that picture as much as I possibly could. And again, I think it had a nice impact. The series was extremely popular, but I think more shifted the discussion a little bit. And I'm glad that even I find in academia, people now have a somewhat broader notion of what neorealism was about.
Well, thank you. I'll look that up too. Tell me some other categories of Italian film that you think would be worthy for our audience to look up and to see.
Well, there's, again, so much. Italian cinema is just one of the richest of all national cinemas. Certainly the period in the 50s and early 60s was a moment when Italian cinema almost seemed to be able to do no wrong, because on the one hand, they had great, what you might think of as very serious artistic masterpieces by people like Fellini and Antonioni, a little bit later Bertolucci or Bellocchio, but at the same time, they had a fantastically successful popular cinema, the wonderful Italian comedies from that era, people like Monicelli or Dino Risi. And that was, I think, always the strength of Italian cinema, is that you had both of these segments coexisting.
Such a rich film history. What about contemporary Italian movies?
Well, I was really happy that last year the Oscar went to La Grande Bellezza, which I think is a terrific film by Paolo Sorrentino. But there's really a lot of good Italian filmmaking going on. It's really, I think, not so much the fault of the Italians as it is of our own very limited film culture here in the United States. We have very few cinemas that show foreign language subtitled films, and unfortunately the audience for that kind of cinema has dwindled over the years. But each year I think Italy creates quite a few interesting films. Unfortunately, they're not that well known to the American public.
Is there some hallmark of an Italian film that differentiates it from a Spanish or American film?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think it gets very difficult to make those distinctions, because even in Italian cinema, I mean, how do you describe one cinema that contains both Antonioni and Totò? I mean, it's an enormous range of sensibilities that are sort of being, presented there. So I think it's hard to really say there's one essence of something that is Italian. I would say that, and again, one of the hallmarks for me of Italy has been, over the years, generally the ability to keep both a kind of popular cinema and a kind of more ambitious artistic cinema sort of in balance, and often with films produced by the same company, which is, I think, very interesting as well. So that was, I think, during the great years of Italian cinema in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, something that really did distinguish it.
Thank you so much, Richard.
My pleasure.
It was such a delight chatting.
Okay.
We've got to go see a movie.
You should.